What if wearing a small silver cross in a courtroom could get you fined, silenced, and thrown out? What if standing quietly for your faith turned you into the face of a national firestorm? This is the true story of Karoline Leavitt, a young woman who refused to back down, and in doing so, reignited something powerful in the heart of America. From a single courtroom standoff to a historic federal trial, this story isn't just about law, it's about liberty. Stay with us, because by the end you might just believe in something you thought America had forgotten. It was supposed to be a routine legal appearance. A brisk Tuesday morning in Pennsylvania. Federal courtroom, marble floors, flags flanking the seal of justice behind the bench. Everything in order until Karoline Leavitt walked in. She was composed as always, dressed in a tailored navy suit, her blonde hair pinned back with intention. Around her neck, barely the size of a quarter, hung a silver cross. It caught the light as she took her seat. That's all it took. Judge Gerald Wynn glanced up from the bench, his expression unreadable. Then it changed. His gavel struck hard, not to begin the hearing but to interrupt it. He narrowed his eyes, pointed at Karoline's necklace, and in a voice that echoed off the marble walls said, "Remove that symbol. This is a court of law, not a cathedral." There was silence. Not even the reporters' keyboards clacked. Karoline didn't move. She blinked once, processing the demand. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said calmly, "this cross isn't a statement. It's who I am." Judge Wynn snapped, "You will not wear objects that provoke or polarize in my courtroom." She didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She simply said no. The gavel came down again. He fined her $750 on the spot. Then, in front of the stunned courtroom, he ordered her removed. A bailiff approached. Karoline stood on her own, silent, proud, and unshaken. She walked out without saying another word, but a young paralegal near the back had already started recording. And within minutes, the footage was everywhere. The clip spread like wildfire, first on X, formerly Twitter, then Facebook, then cable news. There she was, a White House press secretary removed from court simply for wearing a cross. No shouting, no drama, just a calm refusal and a judge's fury. "What country is this?" someone commented. "Since when is faith offensive?" another wrote. Within 24 hours, it had been viewed over 6 million times. The reaction was immediate. From church pews in Ohio to diners in Alabama, Americans asked themselves what just happened. The symbolism was too raw, too real. A federal judge stripping someone's dignity because of her belief on U.S. soil in a room built for justice. And this wasn't just any woman. This was Karoline Leavitt, a daughter of New Hampshire, a rising star in the administration, a woman known not for shouting but for standing firm. And now, because of one simple cross, she was being publicly penalized, branded a fanatic by a man in robes. It was more than a fine. It felt like a line had been crossed. News anchors hesitated, afraid of the implications. Was it constitutional? Was the judge justified? But the American public didn't hesitate. They had seen the clip. They didn't need legal lectures. They saw a young woman stand her ground, and they saw a judge lash out, not because she broke the law, but because she brought her faith with her. At a veterans center in Indiana, one Vietnam vet said it best. That girl didn't curse, didn't protest. She just wore a cross. And that judge looked at her like she was a threat. By Thursday, pastors were speaking from the pulpit. Friday morning talk radio lit up. If this can happen to her, one caller said, it can happen to any of us. This wasn't just about Karoline anymore. It was about America. It was about the First Amendment. It was about the very idea that a person could carry their beliefs with them into a school, a workplace, even a courtroom, and not be punished for it. What Judge Wynn called provocative, millions of Americans called sacred. And yet the silence from officials was deafening. No apology, no retraction, no statement from the court. Just the image Karoline Leavitt standing in a courtroom wearing a cross and being treated like a criminal. By the weekend, protest signs began appearing in Pennsylvania. Faith isn't a threat. We wear the cross with her. No judge silences God. But Karoline hadn't posted a single word. Not a tweet, not a press release, not even a quote. Until Sunday night. In a short 3-sentence statement released to the press, she wrote, "My faith is not a fashion. It's not a political stunt. It's a quiet truth I carry with me always." That was it. And that was enough. It confirmed what millions already believed: she wasn't trying to make a scene. She hadn't gone into that courtroom with a message. She had gone in as herself, and someone in power decided that wasn't acceptable. The questions spread like fire in dry brush. Who's really on trial here? Not Karoline. Not anymore. The cross that Karoline Leavitt refused to remove didn't just start an argument. It sparked a revolution. Within a week of the Pennsylvania courtroom incident, the viral video had surpassed 10 million views. It wasn't just trending anymore, it was spreading, cutting across the usual political divides. Americans weren't just watching, they were choosing sides. And Karoline, she wasn't backing down. She filed suit. 850 million, that was the figure that turned heads across every news desk and legal roundtable in the country. It wasn't about money. It was about the magnitude of the violation. Karoline's legal team framed it clearly: violation of the First Amendment, suppression of religious liberty, abuse of judicial power. The defendant, federal Judge Gerald Wynn. The case didn't just name him. It called him out. The complaint accused Wynn of not only violating Karoline's constitutional rights, but of engaging in a pattern of judicial discrimination against religious Americans. That cross, it wasn't his first target, and now it wouldn't be his last, because Karoline was ready to drag his entire record into the spotlight. Within 48 hours, the media roared. Fox News ran the headline, "Crossfire in the Courtroom, Leavitt Strikes Back." MSNBC countered with "Extremism or expression, Leavitt's legal stunt sparks controversy." Some called her a political opportunist. Others called her a patriot. But one thing was certain: America was watching, and the courtroom was no longer a neutral space. It had become a battlefield for the soul of the country. As Karoline's legal motion hit the federal docket, support poured in from unlikely places. Faith leaders from different backgrounds, Catholic, Jewish, evangelical, and Muslim, held a joint press conference in Richmond, Virginia. One rabbi held up a small Torah necklace and said, "If she can be silenced today, we can all be silenced tomorrow." Meanwhile, Karoline's team wasn't just resting on principle. They were digging for proof. That's when Eva Tran entered the picture. Eva, a sharp, no-nonsense investigative journalist of Vietnamese descent, had built her career exposing corruption in city governments. She wasn't political. She was relentless. And when she saw Karoline's video, something clicked. She went looking, and what she found changed everything. Eva began investigating Judge Wynn's prior rulings and disciplinary records. What emerged was a disturbing pattern. 27 documented incidents over the past 10 years, where he had censured or penalized individuals for wearing religious symbols in court. Crosses, yarmulkes, headscarves, none had been spared. He had fined a Muslim woman for whispering a prayer before testifying. A Catholic juror was removed after refusing to cover his rosary tattoo. None of it had made the news. Until now. Eva compiled it all into a digital file and brought it straight to Karoline. "Wynn didn't just violate your rights," she said. "He's been doing it for years. You're the first person who fought back." But they needed more than testimony. They needed a trail. That's when Dr. Luis Romero came in. Romero, a quiet, detail-oriented data analyst formerly with the Department of Justice, specialized in forensic finance. Karoline's legal counsel, brought him on to examine Judge Wynn's financial disclosures. It didn't take long. Buried beneath the legal filings, travel expenses, and donor-backed retreats, Romero found irregular contributions, several linked to shell organizations, with names like Secular Vision and Legal Equality Now. With deeper digging, Romero discovered that Wynn had funneled over $300,000 in judicial conference expenses into third-party nonprofits that lobbied against public religious expression. These weren't just ideological affiliations. They were payments, quiet influence disguised as policy engagement. The deeper the team dug, the more it looked like this wasn't just personal bias. It was institutional targeting. And if there was any doubt that Karoline was in danger of being silenced, it disappeared the day she got an anonymous letter. No name, no return address, just 6 words on a single piece of paper. You wear that cross, you burn. Karoline turned the note over to the authorities, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she called in Detective Rachel Klein, a retired FBI agent known for her work on religious hate crimes and domestic civil liberties cases. Rachel had once led the investigation that brought down a judge for bribery in Florida. She didn't hesitate when Karoline asked for help. Her first words, upon joining the team: "If they've been burying evidence, we're digging up the whole graveyard." Rachel began interviewing court employees, bailiffs, even former clerks who had worked under Wynn. And slowly the silence cracked. One former assistant confirmed Wynn had ordered religious emblems to be visually minimized in his courtroom. Another revealed he had once torn a pocket Bible in front of a defendant. Most of these stories had never seen the light of day until now. All the while, public support was rising. Karoline's refusal to stay silent had struck a chord. Town halls in Arkansas passed symbolic resolutions supporting her. A billboard went up in rural Texas that read, "We stand with the cross." Even a group of retired judges across party lines issued a joint statement condemning Wynn's conduct. But not everyone was celebrating. Critics on the left doubled down, calling Karoline a provocateur. Editorials claimed she was weaponizing religion for political gain. But the more they attacked, the more the public rallied. For many Americans, especially older generations, the issue was simple. You don't punish someone for wearing a cross in America, especially not in a courtroom, especially not in silence. By the end of the second week, Karoline was no longer just a plaintiff. She had become a symbol of generational courage, of constitutional clarity, and of what happens when one person stands firm against the machinery of power. She gave no fiery speeches. She didn't hold rallies, but the presence of her cross and the calm refusal to hide it had ignited a national storm. As she exited a legal meeting late Friday evening, a reporter shouted, "Karoline, are you afraid?" She paused, looked straight ahead, and answered simply, "No. I'm not afraid, because the First Amendment was never meant to be optional. Not for me. Not for anyone." By the third week, the courtroom wasn't the only place where Judge Gerald Wynn was being judged. The American people were doing it in real time through screens in churches across coffee counters. Karoline Leavitt's $850 million lawsuit was no longer just legal news. It had become the moral flashpoint of the year. And just as momentum began to build behind her, Judge Wynn did something that turned the story from constitutional controversy into outright scandal. He vanished. One morning, a clerk went to deliver documents to Wynn's chambers. The door was locked. His calendar cleared. His cell phone off. No formal resignation, no court filing, no warning. By noon, federal marshals were knocking on his door. He was already gone. A leaked TSA alert revealed Wynn had boarded a private flight to Reykjavik, Iceland, just hours after a grand jury had approved a subpoena for his financial records. What had started as a fine over a cross was now turning into a manhunt for a federal judge. Karoline's team, already neck-deep in depositions, found themselves staring at each other in disbelief. But Karoline didn't pause. She looked across the table and said, "If he's running, we're getting close." The Department of Justice released a tepid statement. "We are aware of Judge Wynn's departure and are assessing next steps." But America wasn't assessing. America was reacting. Eva Tran, the relentless journalist now embedded with Karoline's legal team, was first to break the news on social media. Her tweet simply read, "Breaking: Judge Wynn has fled the country. What is he hiding?" It exploded. Within hours, the hashtag #WynOnTheRun was trending nationwide, and just beneath it, that cross on her neck, a direct callback to Karoline's silent refusal that started it all. Still, the media hesitated. Some networks framed Wynn's departure as a personal retreat under pressure. Others subtly suggested Karoline's team was inflating the narrative. But it didn't matter anymore. The public had made up its mind. If Wynn was innocent, why was he hiding? That weekend, Dr. Luis Romero came back with results that would make that question louder. He'd been digging into the shell corporations Wynn had used to mask donations. One name popped up repeatedly: National Forum for Legal Purity. At first glance, it looked like an academic nonprofit, but Romero tracked its funding straight from Wynn's personal trust account. And from there into the hands of groups actively lobbying to remove religious expression from public spaces. This wasn't just an ideological preference. It was a coordinated campaign, funded, systematic, hidden. Romero presented the findings to Karoline's legal team with a grim tone. "This isn't one judge with a bias. This is a network. And Wynn was paying for the gasoline while we were arguing about the fire." Karoline responded without blinking. "Then it's not just about my cross. It's about everyone's." Meanwhile, Detective Rachel Klein, the ex-FBI investigator now tracking Wynn's every move, received an encrypted message from a former court assistant. The source refused to go public, but he offered something even more valuable: a USB drive copied before Wynn's exit. On it, audio files, private meetings, voice memos, and one chilling sentence recorded during a conversation with a legal consultant in his chambers: "If she builds a case, I'll bury the evidence before it buries me." The air went cold when Klein hit play. There it was, in his own voice. Not just denial of rights, but the intentional destruction of truth. Karoline played it once, then looked to Eva and said, "He's not hiding from scandal. He's hiding from justice." Eva began prepping a segment for independent broadcast. No cable filters, no spin, just the raw clip. And as she worked, a new player entered the arena unexpectedly and uninvited. Karoline's phone lit up with an incoming text from an unknown number. "Back off or your data gets erased next." That same day, Romero's cloud storage was breached. His backups gone. But what they didn't expect was Rachel. Klein had mirrored every file and stored the physical copies in a secure off-site location. The data was safe. And now they had something more than paper trails. They had intent. Karoline issued her first public statement since Wynn fled. She stood before the Capitol, flanked by veterans pastors and a young woman who had once been expelled for wearing a hijab. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She simply said, "He tried to erase a cross. Now he's erasing himself." Truth has memory, and America still remembers what justice looks like. Across the country, something shifted. Churches held candlelight vigils. Veterans taped mini flags with crosses on their porches. In a small town in Kansas, a group of farmers carved the phrase "Truth never hides" into a winter wheat field that spanned over 600 feet. The Justice Department, now facing a political firestorm, issued a federal warrant for Wynn's return. Interpol activated red notice status. Wynn was now officially a fugitive. Eva, relentless as ever, caught wind of his next move and arranged flight from Reykjavik to Argentina under a false corporate manifest. The logistics were airtight except for one thing. Wynn's server, though, wiped still-pinged location metadata, and Romero's residual forensic logs traced it back to a villa near the water in Iceland. Klein contacted Interpol. The raid was on. Karoline didn't join. She didn't need to. She sat quietly in a temporary office in D.C., watching a red dot on a screen blink in place. When Interpol breached the villa, Wynn was stuffing documents into a suitcase. He didn't make it to the door. The footage later aired on national television. Wynn face, pale eyes, hollow, being led away in cuffs. When a reporter shouted, "Do you regret what you did?" he muttered, "She wasn't supposed to win." Back in D.C., Karoline said nothing at first. Then softly to her team, he tried to silence a cross. Now the whole country's listening. The moment Judge Gerald Wynn disappeared from the United States, the fight for justice left the courtroom and went global. But Karoline Leavitt didn't blink. While the Department of Justice hesitated, while politicians scrambled for safe statements, Karoline launched a counteroffensive, not with threats, but with truth. She called it, "Truth has no border." It wasn't just a hashtag. It was a message wrapped in steel. Justice doesn't stop at the shoreline, and neither will we. Her words, just 15 in total, posted late one night, lit the internet on fire. He fled. But the Constitution didn't, and neither did we. Truth has no border. Within hours, the phrase had crossed time zones. Americans shared it with flags and crosses. Australians reposted it with freedom down under. In the streets of Warsaw, a Polish priest was seen holding a sign with the same phrase standing outside his cathedral. One truth was becoming clear. Faith isn't local, and neither is injustice. But behind the scenes, the work was anything but symbolic. Detective Rachel Klein, the former FBI investigator now leading the hunt for Wynn, had already begun building a network of international cooperation. Her background in cross-border criminal cases made her the perfect match. And when the U.S. formally requested help, Interpol didn't hesitate. With the forensic location data provided by Dr. Luis Romero, they traced Wynn to a luxury villa on the coast of Reykjavik, Iceland, tucked behind trees and heavy stone walls. The judge wasn't just hiding, he was preparing to vanish again, this time headed for Chile on a private jet filed under a corporate front. Klein, calm as ever, sent a coded transmission to the Reykjavik task force. Subject, in location. Target may flee. Breach at dawn. But it wasn't just the authorities preparing for impact. Online, Leon Davis, a 21-year-old TikToker and former youth pastor from Tennessee, was about to become the face of a new movement. With a few clips, his phone, and one powerful idea, Leon edited a 30-second video that would become a cultural moment. The video opened with a black screen and one line of text. They tried to erase a cross. Then came the footage, Wynn pointing Karoline, standing her ground, her cross gleaming faintly in the courtroom light. Cut to headlines of his escape, his villa, his silence. Then finally Karoline's voice, quiet but resolute, from a press conference. Truth remembers what injustice wants to forget. The final frame. A montage of Americans, young and old, wearing their religious emblems with pride. Caption: Wynn tried to hide the truth. Karoline lit the fire again. Hashtag truth has no border. The video hit 20 million views in 48 hours. Leon's inbox flooded. Churches invited him to speak. Veterans groups called him a patriot. A grandmother in Nebraska mailed him a handwritten letter. "Son, your generation just gave mine hope again." Meanwhile, in Iceland, the villa surveillance was now complete. Klein and Interpol watched as Wynn moved through the house. A final duffel bag packed. 2 bodyguards stationed at the doors. Outside, snow fell quietly, covering tire tracks. The house looked peaceful, but everyone inside knew a storm was coming. 32 a.m. local time. The breach began. Black SUVs rolled in like thunder. Interpol agents flanked the perimeter. One disguised as a groundskeeper cut the power from the back wall. Inside, Wynn's alarm sounded. He ran for the balcony. But it was too late. An agent's voice cut through the dawn. "Charles Wynn, step away from the suitcase. You're under arrest." Wynn froze. He looked down at the bag filled with documents, cash, burner phones, and then back at the man aiming a flashlight and a badge in his face. His shoulders slumped. For the first time in weeks, he spoke the truth. She wasn't supposed to win. Back in Washington, Karoline stood in a dimly lit briefing room. Her phone buzzed once. A secure message. Subject in custody. Safe transfer underway. She looked up at her team, Eva Rachel Romero, and gave a single nod. The word spread like gospel. Every major outlet interrupted coverage. Judge Wynn captured in Iceland. Cross-case breakthrough. Leavitt's fugitive judge brought home. But the most shared video of the day didn't come from a studio. It came from Leon Davis. He uploaded another clip, this time with Karoline's image in one window, and Wynn being led away in cuffs in another. His caption said it all. The cross didn't flee. The judge did. As the arrest footage looped through social media and cable news, something bigger happened, something emotional, unplanned, and American to the core. Veterans, pastors, and everyday citizens began gathering outside federal courthouses across the country. Not in protest, but in gratitude. They lit candles. They held up signs that read, "Faith is not a crime, and the cross still stands." At a courthouse in Ohio, an 82-year-old man in a wheelchair held up his Navy Bible and said, "I wore this through Korea. They didn't strip it off me then. I'll be buried with it now. Karoline's fight is ours." That night, Karoline finally spoke. She appeared on a live stream, not through a flashy studio, but from a quiet side office in D.C., an American flag gently waving behind her. No teleprompter, no advisors. Just her voice, steady as ever. Justice may have taken a detour, but it arrived. Not because I shouted, but because I didn't sit down. Judge Wynn ran because he knew truth was catching up. But justice doesn't hide behind stone walls. It walks with anyone who's willing to stand for it. She paused, then looked directly into the camera. This wasn't a win for me. This was a message for anyone who's ever been told their faith doesn't belong. It belongs. You belong. It was the most anticipated courtroom showdown in years. Not since Watergate had a federal case drawn this much public attention. And yet this wasn't about political break-ins or stolen documents. This was about something far more intimate to the American soul, faith. And whether in the United States of America, it could still be worn without fear. After weeks of global pursuit, Judge Gerald Wynn was in custody, and the courtroom in Washington, D.C. became the stage not just for justice, but for a reckoning. The country tuned in. The proceedings were live-streamed on every major platform. Screens lit up in living rooms, community centers, and retirement homes across the nation. The trial wasn't just being watched. It was being felt. And at the center of it all stood Karoline Leavitt. Not as a protester, not as a pundit, but as the key witness in a federal trial that was about to define how Americans talked about the First Amendment for the next generation. She stepped into the courtroom wearing the same silver cross that started it all. The silence was deafening. When called to the stand, Karoline didn't flinch. She spoke clearly, steadily, not as someone seeking attention, but as someone who understood the gravity of the moment. The prosecution opened with the now infamous footage, Wynn pointing at Karoline's cross, demanding its removal and ordering her out when she refused. But that was just the beginning. Next came the Wynn file, a 2-inch thick binder that shook the courtroom. Inside were 187 documented cases stretching over a decade of individuals penalized, removed, or silenced by Judge Wynn solely for wearing religious symbols. Crosses, hijabs, yarmulkes, prayer beads. It was all there. Names, dates, fines, expulsions. The jury flipped through the evidence in stunned silence. One page showed a single mother fined for reading a psalm aloud before testifying. Another detailed a Sikh man barred from entering with his ceremonial kirpan, despite having legal clearance. Then came the emails. Pulled from Wynn's seized devices by Dr. Luis Romero and confirmed by Detective Rachel Klein, they weren't just suggestive, they were explosive. One sent from Wynn to a group of ideological allies read, "We have to choke the roots of public faith before it infects civic process. They're not just symbols, they're signals." Another email more chilling. "She's too clean. We'll find a way to frame her or freeze her out." Then the clincher. A recorded voice memo Wynn had left for a staffer just days before his escape. His voice unmistakable, cold. "Delete every court record with her name. If Leavitt builds a case, I'll bury the evidence before it buries me." When that played, even seasoned reporters in the press box sat back in shock. The defense, led by Martin Feld, scrambled to regain control. He argued that Karoline's lawsuit was nothing more than a political stunt, that she wanted to catapult herself into a presidential run and was exploiting religious sentiment to gain national fame. Karoline didn't react. But Eva Tron, sitting a few rows behind, did. She passed a folder to the prosecution, transcribed notes and video from Wynn's previous cases that matched his discriminatory behavior across years long before Karoline ever became a household name. The prosecutor stood up and laid it out plainly. "This isn't a case about ambition. This is a case about authority gone rogue. About a judge who used his gavel not to uphold the law but to erase anyone who lived it out loud." Then Karoline asked the judge if she could speak directly. Permission was granted. She rose from the witness chair, stepped forward, and faced the jury, not with fire but with steel. Her words were simple. "He fined a cross, but he couldn't find the truth. He called me a fanatic for quietly wearing my faith. But what does it say about this country if a piece of silver can silence a citizen? This case is not about me. It's about every grandmother who bows her head in public, every student who dares to wear their faith, every soldier who kept scripture in their pocket while fighting for the freedoms we now debate." She looked over at Judge Wynn, seated in a rumpled gray suit, now pale and sunken. "You didn't just try to remove a cross from a courtroom. You tried to remove it from a country." There was no applause. This was a federal courtroom, but across America, the impact was immediate. Twitter, Facebook, cable news, they all lit up. Even Leon Davis, the young TikToker who had helped ignite the #TruthHasNoBorder movement, posted Karoline's statement with the caption, "History just happened." By the third day of testimony, more witnesses came forward. A young Muslim woman expelled from court for wearing a hijab. A Jewish man fined for refusing to cover his yarmulke. A Vietnam veteran whose flag pin with a small cross was deemed inappropriate. They didn't cry on the stand, but America did. The defense attempted one last play, alleging that some of the records were incomplete, that perhaps the discrimination wasn't as deliberate as portrayed. But then Detective Rachel Klein brought forward internal memos Wynn had hidden in encrypted storage. One document marked, "Private read suppress quietly deny officially, and never let religion slip back in through sentiment." It was over. The courtroom didn't need drama. The facts spoke louder than any headline ever could. When Karoline stepped down from the stand, there was no dramatic walkout. She simply returned to her seat, folded her hands over her cross, and waited. And when the prosecution rested and the courtroom stood still, the weight of the truth was undeniable. After weeks of tension, testimony, and truth, The courtroom fell silent as the foreman of the jury stood. Every eye inside the room and across millions of living rooms watched closely. The clerk asked the question that carried the weight of a country. "What is your verdict?" The answer came without hesitation. "Guilty." On all charges, no gasp, no chaos, just a stunned stillness that felt sacred. Karoline Leavitt didn't cry. She didn't raise her fist. She didn't shout. Instead, she bowed her head and touched the silver cross on her chest, the very emblem that Judge Gerald Wynn once demanded she remove. The same cross that ignited a legal war, launched a global campaign, and now symbolized a victory not just for her, but for faith itself. The cameras caught it, that quiet gesture. It said everything. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted. From veterans in uniform to grandparents holding signs reading, "The cross still stands," thousands cheered. Across the nation, church bells rang. In homes and town halls, people clapped not for vengeance but for vindication. Not just because a judge was convicted, but because the Constitution had spoken, and faith still had a home in America. But Karoline wasn't finished. Just days after the verdict, she walked into the Capitol, not for celebration, but for legislation. In her hands was a simple typed document, the Faith Expression Protection Act. Its purpose clear and powerful: to affirm the right of all American citizens to wear, display, or carry symbols of their sincerely held religious beliefs in all public institutions, including courtrooms, schools, and civic spaces, without fear of penalty, removal, or reprisal. For Karoline, it wasn't enough that she had won in court. She wanted to make sure no one else would have to fight the battle she had fought. The response was immediate. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle leaned in. They had seen the trial. They had heard the evidence. And they had seen the people, millions of Americans who rallied behind Karoline, not because of party or politics, but because they recognized the threat to something deeper: the freedom to believe and the freedom to express it. Within 3 weeks, the Faith Expression Protection Act passed both chambers of Congress with bipartisan support. The president signed it with Karoline standing beside him, her cross once again visible, this time in front of the American flag. News anchors couldn't ignore the irony. The very symbol a federal judge had tried to silence was now protected by federal law. And the ripple effect was fast. Texas passed a state version within days. Ohio followed. In North Dakota, Arkansas, Tennessee, all moved quickly to adopt similar protections. School boards, courthouse administrators, even transit authorities began revising policies. Teachers were no longer told to hide their crosses. Muslim students could wear hijabs without exception forms. Jewish public employees were permitted to wear yarmulkes freely at official events. It wasn't just policy. It was healing. Karoline received thousands of letters. One from a retired pastor read, "Miss Leavitt, I wore a cross under my shirt for years out of fear. Now I wear it over my tie. Thank you." Another came from a 12-year-old girl in Nebraska. "They told me I couldn't pray before class, but now my teacher says I can." Through it all, Karoline remained the same, measured, graceful, determined. She didn't take a victory lap. She took responsibility. At a quiet press conference, when asked what the law meant to her, she said, "This isn't about forcing faith into public life. It's about removing fear from it. You shouldn't have to choose between your beliefs and your rights. Not in America." For the generation watching, especially those 65 and older, it wasn't just refreshing. It was redemptive. After years of watching cultural shifts, rising secular pressure, and courtroom confusion, they finally saw someone stand her ground, not with rage, but with reverence. And she won. The courtroom was quiet now. The cameras had moved on. The verdict had been read, the law had been passed. and Judge Gerald Wynn had become a footnote in the story of a country that rediscovered its conscience. But for Karoline Leavitt, the mission was far from over. The cross she had once been ordered to remove had not just been defended in court. It had awakened something far greater, a movement that stretched beyond politics, beyond parties, beyond headlines. And it was just beginning. Months after the Faith Expression Protection Act passed through Congress, something extraordinary happened. A park in suburban Maryland, one that had once banned group prayer after a years-old legal complaint, announced that it would host the first Interfaith Freedom Forum in American history. The very space where prayer had once been silenced would now become a stage for unity in belief. On that stage stood three leaders: a Christian pastor, a Jewish rabbi, and a Muslim imam, shoulder to shoulder, speaking not as symbols of separation, but as voices of shared purpose. They didn't debate doctrine. They didn't argue theology. Instead, they each spoke about what it meant to live in a country that let them speak at all. And standing just to the side of the stage, eyes shining, hands folded, was Karoline. She didn't give a speech that day. She let the moment speak for itself. And when asked afterward what it meant to her, she said softly, "This isn't about winning. It's about restoring what should have never been lost." Her words echoed in every direction, not through volume, but through clarity. Across the country, schools began reversing quiet bans on religious symbols. Students once told to tuck away crosses, yarmulkes, or headscarves were now encouraged to share stories about what their beliefs meant to them. Teachers rewrote lesson plans to include the First Amendment in action, not just in textbooks. And courthouses across all 50 states began posting signs at entryways: "Freedom of faith, welcomed here." The movement had gone from a courtroom victory to a cultural revival. But the public didn't just follow, it documented. And no one captured that momentum better than Eva Tran. Eva, the investigative journalist who uncovered Judge Wynn's history, released a nationwide documentary just 6 months after the verdict. Its title was Simple, Powerful, and Personal, She Held the Cross. The film chronicled everything: Karoline's removal from the courtroom, the lawsuit, Wynn's escape, the Interpol raid, the trial, and the passage of the law. But it didn't end there. It followed the people. The veterans, the teachers, the store clerks, the retired judges, the mothers, and the students, all of whom had written letters, shared memories, or stepped up to say, "That story is mine too." The premiere aired on PBS and then on streaming. Within 48 hours, it was the #1 most-watched documentary on American faith in over a decade. Viewers 60 and older made up more than half its audience. For many, it wasn't just a film. It was a mirror. One viewer in Ohio, a retired nurse, commented online, "I never thought I'd see someone fight for faith and win." Karoline reminded me that grace still changes things. But the next viral moment wouldn't come from a screen. It would come from a phone in the hands of a 21-year-old named Leon Davis. Leon, the TikToker who helped launch the viral #TruthHasNoBorder campaign during the height of Wynn's disappearance, was invited to livestream the Interfaith Freedom Forum. Armed with nothing more than a tripod and heart, he captured every word, every moment, every sign lifted by the crowd. His phone didn't shake when the pastor spoke. It didn't blur when the imam recited a prayer for peace. And it didn't drop when Karoline, without a microphone, read a letter aloud. It was handwritten, folded, a little creased at the corners. From a 12-year-old girl in Nebraska. The letter read, "Dear Miss Karoline, my school used to tell me not to wear my cross necklace because it made other students uncomfortable. I stopped wearing it. I was scared. I didn't want to be called a bad kid. Then I saw your story. My mom showed me the video where you stood in court and didn't take it off. I wear mine again now, and I'm not scared anymore. Thank you." Karoline paused, folded the letter again. Her voice cracked but didn't break as she looked out at the crowd and simply said, "That's why we did this." Leon's live stream hit 25 million views in less than a week. But more importantly, it sparked local gatherings across all 50 states. People came not just to celebrate, but to pray again in public parks, in school libraries, in courthouses, and in town squares. Quietly, proudly, peacefully. And so from a courtroom battle to a cultural rebirth, Karoline's journey had become America's revival. Not one built on outrage, but on order. Not driven by revenge, but by resolve. And not carried on by politics, but by people, ordinary citizens, who now felt empowered to say, "My faith has a place." Back in Washington, Karoline declined political offers. She refused book deals. She stepped away from cameras unless the message was bigger than herself, and when asked what came next, she said, "I'm not here to go viral. I'm here to make sure no one's ever silenced for believing again." Life lesson from Karoline's journey. Across a stand. A legacy. Karoline Leavitt's story isn't just about courtrooms or headlines. It's about courage, conviction, and the quiet strength of living your values even when the world tells you not to. For many older Americans who grew up in a time when faith was woven into daily life, this case reminds us that the freedom to believe is not automatic. It must be protected, lived out, and passed down. Whether it's wearing a cross, saying grace at a restaurant, or standing up for what's right when no one else will. Karoline's journey shows us that dignity and quiet faith can still change the course of a nation. You're never too old to defend what matters, and never too small to spark something bigger. So if you've ever wondered whether your story, your faith, or your voice still matters, this is your answer. What does religious freedom mean to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that defend American values.